and this is part 2 of my Nintendo pre-E3 2014 special. And this time around, I want to talk about why is Nintendo a big deal for most gamers in the gaming industry and in the gaming community. Well, it's a big history, and this is my opinion, my perspective about it. A lot of people have their own version, and this is my version. So here we go. All right, the majority of people mostly like Nintendos. I'm gonna guess in their probably between their late 20s to early mid 50s. There you go. Late 20s to mid 50s. Why? Is because people who grew up in the 80s and perhaps maybe in the 90s, let's just say 90s, but mostly in the 80s, they started with the NES. And that system was popular. Why is it popular? Well, I'll give you back history. And if you heard about the history of Atari, how E.T. in Atari basically ruined Atari, and it was a nail in the coffin for the video game crash of the 1979. Yes, in the late 1970s, there was a lot of video games. There was too much video game. People got oversaturated and said, forget it. And E.T. was the nail in the coffin, and because of it, they just said, forget this, we're done, we don't want to play video game anymore. And Yamauchi basically, at the same time, changed his business, Nintendo, from a toy business to a video game business. And Yamauchi basically revolutionized what video game is. So, and this guy learned from the mistakes of the Atari, people who work with Atari. So Yamauchi not only created, let's create a better video game, and not only that, is that his methods were actually good. Some might not agree. Some said that, wow, but his methods were he uses an iron fist when dealing with Nintendo, with video game business. Yes, and sadly to say, it worked because there was quality control. So that's what makes Nintendo good in the NES days. Was there was so much quality control, and at the same time, still there were a lot of games on the Nintendo system, from first party to third party. And the whole point is that if you had a Nintendo in your home, you were the cool kid in the block. So, okay. So, why is Nintendo so a big deal? Like I said, without Nintendo, there wouldn't be video games. Most people who ever does journalism on video game, movie about video game, anything related to video game, because we grew up with Nintendo. Yes, I'm also part. That's why I always supported, well, let's say I always loved Nintendo because I grew up with them. When I was a kid, I would do Nintendo thing in my art class, and every time I do a story, it's about, I'm always Nintendo in the head. I may be sick in the head when I was a kid about Nintendo, but that's the whole point, because it was very influential to me. That's why I got into video game. That's why I'm doing videos about video game, is because it's a passion of mine. I love playing video games. I grew up playing a Nintendo. Like I said before, when I had a Nintendo, I never had a Sega Master. When I had a Super Nintendo, I refused to get the Genesis until Sony came in. But that's going to be a different story. But it impacted my life in the 80s and the 90s. The NES and the SNES were one of my favorite systems because it impacted me the most. It had the most history for me. Not so much with the N64, because by the time the N64 came, that's when Nintendo became downfall and I shift to Sony. But again, same goes with Sony, and I explained this before a long time ago. Without Nintendo, there wouldn't be Sony, and I already gave my story about that on the. I gave my story about how Sony basically was the PlayStation was created was from an idea from Nintendo, and I'll link that in the description. But I'll put the link on the description box. Sorry, but the whole point is, without Nintendo, there wouldn't be video game. There wouldn't be Sony. There wouldn't be Microsoft, TurboGrafx, Neo Geo to some extent, and arcades basically. But I'm not. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think arcades came before Nintendo, but I think more arcades evolved because it was inspired by Nintendo. So that's why Nintendo is a big deal for most people. And the question is not that you hear it. Why do Nintendo fans are so frustrated right now? Because it's easy to say. Like for me, I support Nintendo so much. Like I said, I do video about Nintendo. I talk about Nintendo. When I was a kid, I always loved Nintendo. To some extent, I eat, sleep Nintendo when I was a kid. And also right now, seeing Nintendo like this is very frustrating. They don't listen to their fans. They don't accept ideas. And when basically bad thing happened, they said, "Oh man, it's too late." Something that could be prevented, and they didn't. And that's the problem. Why? That's why Nintendo's a big deal. It is something that helped people's life to some extent as recreation. Now you're seeing them like it's like their former self. And like Brian Altano said in one of the games group, people say Nintendo as a word for video game. Not anymore. It used to be like, "Oh, where's Johnny? Oh, he's in his room playing Nintendo." And in my home country, in the Philippines, they use the word Nintendo. We'll say, "Hey, where's this person? Where is Pedro?" They will all say, "Oh, Pedro is playing Nintendo. He's in his room playing Nintendo." Or the point is, the word Nintendo was equal to video, but not anymore. So like just right now, I say, "Hey, where's Johnny?" They'll probably say, "Oh, he's in his room playing some sort of video game." But even general consuming you in the 1980s and 90s, that what the term Nintendo is, "Oh, video game." Not anymore. Now when you say, "Oh, what's Nintendo?" "Oh, it's just some sort of gaming company." But most people don't even know what it is now. That's why right now, as Nintendo fans, I'm frustrated, and I'm always been frustrated. I mean, they come out with good games, but it's just the business and it's like the evolution is just not there. That's the problem. I mean, it's hard to explain. Again, like I said, without Nintendo, there wouldn't be a video game. That's all I can say. And that is why, for most of us who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, that's when Nintendo's a big deal. That if they go away, it basically says that the video game is not relevant anymore. But you say, well, Sony's still there and Microsoft is there, so what do you mean why it's not relevant? True, but the thing is, both of them came from Nintendo. There wouldn't be a Sony PlayStation without Nintendo, and there wouldn't be Microsoft Xbox without Sony. And tidbit for that, if you want to know why Xbox basically was created, why Microsoft decided to go to the video game business, was because of Sony. They want to copy them. There's nothing wrong with it, but that's the whole point. It's a chain of reaction. Sony wanted to go to the video game business because they were betrayed by Nintendo to some extent. So, and again, like I said before, that video is going to be in the description box about how PlayStation came to be. So, in conclusion, that if you didn't grow up with Nintendo, it's going to be hard for you guys to understand why it's so important. why is it so great about Nintendo? Because again, because now you probably grew up with Sony, with Microsoft, Xbox, or PlayStation. I mean, there are some kids who still like Nintendo, but from the majority, from what I heard, they're either into Xbox games or PlayStation games. Nintendo, well, there are some. I heard kids love 3DS, but when it comes to the Wii U, they're like, I don't want this. I want a 3DS because the cool kid has them. So still, it might not be so a big deal for them versus a kid who grew up in the 80s or 90s that Nintendo's a big deal. So seeing them go away is not a good thing. So that's why that's a big deal. And hopefully in the long run, we'll see that Nintendo still stay. They need to be successful. Again, the key word is it starts with Mario Kart 8 and then E3 2014, the digital event. So we're gonna see what happened there. Hopefully, they can turn this around. If not, well, Nintendo, I wish you luck. Good luck. Okay, well, that's my story about why Nintendo's a big deal. Hopefully, to the new generation gamer, you can understand what's going on. So that's all I can say. So that's it for now. I'll see you guys later. Bye.